We're going to be talking about how to prepare and get planted a new blueberry field. But I think before we talk about actual planting, I think we should have a little discussion on whether it's a wise business move to even be planting blueberries at this time. We know that worldwide acreage is increasing dramatically, and that within 5 years the supply of blueberries in the world is expected to double. So with that knowledge, I mean, how would you talk to a prospective grower?
Well, I think a prospective grower should first of all get some professional advice on the costs and the time it takes to come into production, because to come into production it takes 8 to 10 years. That's one point. The second point is the potential grower should get someone to do a feasibility or a financial projection and develop a business plan, and they can use this to see whether it actually makes sense to expend all that money and then in the end make no profit at all. So they should develop a business plan.
It's obviously not a given that there's going to be somebody out there wanting their blueberries, and so what would you advise them in the marketing side?
Well, that's a key observation, Mark, because from what I've seen all over North America, farms are getting bigger and bigger, and because profit margins are getting smaller, you have to have economy of scale. That means a prospective grower should try and align himself with a receiver or a buyer of his fruit almost before he plants, just to try and understand the market, because a situation could develop where that grower can start producing berries in 4, 5, 6 years and have nowhere to ship those berries. The price has been yo-yoing up and down the last 10 years. I would be haphazardly guessing at what the returns are. The margins of profit are getting slimmer and slimmer, and the fact that you have to have someplace or somewhere to sell your berries. I would say to a prospective grower that they shouldn't take just 5-year average as a price projection. They should actually take 10 years and then go and talk to the processors that have been in business for 10 or 20 years and get more records from them to try and determine what is a reasonable return. There have been years that the cost of harvesting has been 30–40% higher than your gross return, and then you have all your other costs.
The thing that we can't stress enough for prospective growers, before you think about putting a plant in the ground, do your homework. Talk to as many people as you can, get as much information, and make sure that you have a solid business and marketing plan before you get into this business of the wonderful business of blueberries.
When a grower is looking to find a site for planting blueberries, actually before even purchasing that site, he should check out the soil, make sure it's at least reasonably adaptable for blueberries, and then after he's made that decision, then buy the land. And after he's purchased the land, that's when you get into a more detailed questions about soil types, drainage of that soil, pH of that soil, the nutrient levels of that soil, and once he's gone through that process with the supplier of the products that are going to make soil amendments, then that supplier of those amendments will advise him on how much to put into the soil. Then proceed to get the weeds under control, add the amendments to the soil, work them in, and I would say a prospective farmer should actually purchase a property at least 12 months before he's going to plant, sometimes longer, depending how much work is to be done on that. And also, depending when that purchaser can actually get the plants. Sometimes there's 1 or 2 years delay before those plants are available. So that should give lots of opportunity for that prospective farmer to prepare the land. The land should be assessed for, I guess, porosity, but also the clay content will determine how much work has to be done in preparation to make that soil more friable and more amenable for planting blueberry plants. Now, blueberry plants don't have fine root hairs, so they need a more open, porous soil. So if you have a really heavy clay soil, you know what, sometimes soil amendments should be added and incorporated into the planting soil, so that the roots will have a better medium to grow in. So once you've done some of those assessments and made your adjustments to pH, etc., then you work the soil to make sure that it's nice and friable, loose, and it'll be much easier to make those raised beds and shape those beds and the rows in the manner that you want to do so. Now, should a prospective farmer have bought some poor quality land or soil that is a lot heavier, there are options to improve that soil. There is what you call sometimes a hard pan. Now, if you have that type of soil, what you have to do is use a single shank or a double shank subsoiler and go every 4 or 5 feet and break the crust of that bottom layer, and usually they happen to be about only a foot down. So unless you break through that, you're going to be planting blueberry plants into very hard ground, and those blueberry plant roots, once they start to get older, they will not penetrate that soil. When you break through that crust, it helps to mix the existing soil with new, more higher mineralized soil. So really you're actually enhancing the fertility of that soil by doing that. Also, it will also enhance the drainage, the possible drainage, because if you have a hard pan layer, sometimes the water will not drain. So once you've done that and you've plowed and you've rototilled and you've worked that soil to a fine tilth, then you're ready to lay out your field, lay out the headlands, and usually you have to allow at least 25 to 30 feet of headlands at the ends of the rows so that you can hopefully machine pick in the future. Then the next step is you should determine whether you want to plant 10-foot rows or 11-foot wide rows, and how far between the plants within that particular row. The standard happens to be 10 feet. I've seen growers do plant 11 feet between rows. Depending on the type of equipment that you have or intend to use for tractors, sprayers, etc., but also depending on the acreage. If you have really large acreage, then you can afford to go 11-foot rows. But if you have, let's say, 10, 20 acres and you want to farm that land intensely, then you're losing, I would say, 10% by moving from 10 feet to 11 feet. So it's all about how much production you can get from 1 acre. In between the plants in the rows is anywhere from 2 feet to 4 feet. And the commonest I've seen is 3 feet. And I generally would recommend myself 3-foot spacing. It's ideal for machine picking. Also, at 3-foot spacing, you have 1,452 plants per acre. It's easy to work with that figure to calculate and make projections as to maybe what your production might be, etc. So after you've determined that planting, spacing between the rows, you would get a contractor with a bed shaper or a bed former to come, and hopefully that contractor will have a GPS system on his tractor, so once you lay out that first row, every other row is absolutely parallel and 10 feet apart from the original row. And this is very important because if you are, let's say, making applications after planting, if you have to make applications for fertilizer, herbicides, you're banding materials on either side of the row, the product isn't really getting to the plant or where it should be. Also, he has to determine how high a bed does he want, and the width of the top of the bed. Now, if the raised bed is formed and it's too narrow, all the nutrients that he's applying, whether it's granular fertilizer or even liquid drip fertilizer or water for irrigation, the water can run off. So it's better to have at least a 12-inch wide top of the bed, and the bed should probably be not any higher than 12 inches high. You get the bed too high and you plant the plants in that bed, what will happen is, if the bed is way too high, the roots, when they start extending to the outside perimeter of the bed after a year or two, they will be growing out the side of the bed, and the heat from the sun will dry the outside of the roots. Probably one of the primary reasons for making raised beds is so you can get the plant elevated to make it easy for the machine to harvest, because the catch plates have to be as low as possible on the base of the bush, so the berry losses will be minimalized when you're really low down with the catch plates. But another reason for making raised beds is, say, if you're in a really lowland area and you have flooding situations, by elevating those roots above the potential really wet flooding area, you will actually help the soil to warm up sooner, but also help the plant roots to be able to breathe, so they're not submerged and susceptible to, let's say, root rot and other root diseases.
So we're looking at a 1-gallon pot, Mike, which is typical of what's used in the industry. This is variety Liberty, one of the new varieties. From the standpoint of, I guess, assessing the quality of a plant, Mike, I mean, what would you say about this plant?
Any grower that's ordering plants should actually go check out the nursery and the nurseryman. Check out their facilities and see what kind of quality plants they're delivering.
It's absolutely critical that you be obtaining your plants from a nursery that is participating in a testing program to ensure that stock is clean of virus.
At the time of planting, you should be handling them quite gently, and the way to do that is to and the method to plant is turn the plant upside down, and even if you shake it a little bit, then just put the pot away, and then you can check the roots, and you can tell if it's root bound, they're growing around in circles, then you might have to kind of rip the roots apart a little bit. But this plant is not root bound.
So this is what we're looking for, is a well-established root system. We should see roots throughout that all around, potting media, which we are seeing.
And then I'll gently pull some of this bottom part apart, and then set the plant in the soil, and make sure that you really compress that nicely tilled soil up around the root ball to make sure that the soil contacts these roots and you don't have a lot of loose dead airspace where the roots can dry out. So that's one key. I think press the plant in and then put just a little tiny layer of soil on top and press that all around so you get great contacts, root ball with soil contact. If you don't have water, these plants will die on a raised bed probably in a week or so. And all that work you've done and all that money you've invested could be down the drain. What happens is sometimes you can't get out till June, and that's a very difficult time to plant, because what happens is summer's coming and you're planting plants with the leaves coming out and then there's no roots. So that is a very dangerous time, and you have to basically make sure that you water those plants almost immediately. I would suggest that fall planting might be preferential in that situation, because I would get the plants from the nursery at the end of September into October, when the plants are already going dormant and they're really slowing down their growth, or else wait almost till the leaves are off, and then the demand for moisture from these plants is not that great at that time, and you won't lose that many plants due to lack of moisture. Once the plant is in the ground and the leaves fall off and the plant goes into dormancy, and the plant can actually start rooting, and it's actually gets next spring, it'll have a head start, because you're not waiting till June. It'll start growing maybe as soon as the soil temperature gets about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Notice this grower here has just tied these branches together, and I think that's a really excellent idea. You get a wind whipping these off, it could be breaking this off and opening up wounds where disease could get in. So I think that's an important thing. I know it's a lot of extra work, but you know, if you can do this, it will definitely make a benefit, you know, in the long run.
We talked before, Mike, about different schools of thought as far as pruning. You know, pruning before planting, pruning after planting, wait until next spring and pruning, and different growers do different things. Some growers don't prune at all and just kind of tie them up and hope to keep this growth as the base of their plant for next spring. What's your perspective on how these should be handled from a pruning standpoint?
Pruning will actually stimulate the plant to grow, and even if you're planting in the fall, I'm not sure that's the best. Because of this wind factor, and depends where your site selection is, I would suggest that maybe topping off here, and then the plant wouldn't be whipping back and forth, and then you wouldn't have to do this tying.
Right.
But that opens up avenues for disease to the plant, and so that's why just prior to planting or just post-planting, you should put on an excellent fungicide, a topical fungicide, to prevent that disease getting in to if you do the pruning.
The issue with fungicides is something that we've seen more of a concern as recently we've seen more of a problem with diseases like phomopsis, which some of our new varieties seem susceptible to. It's important that you put on protective sprays of, broad spectrum fungicides like Bravo to protect against these diseases, particularly during the early spring rainy period and the early fall rainy period.
Many of these diseases are spread by raindrops. So if you have any type of a disease on one part of the plant, the rain splashing around will definitely spread the disease. And that's why you have to do at least a minimal maintenance program, even if you don't intend to make these plants produce. You can cover the root ball to some extent. However, you cannot bury that root ball. And I've seen fields where the plants are actually died in heavy soil because they've suffocated. And that is the worst that can happen. One thing, if there's going to be a sawdust mulch applied, rather than putting all that soil on, sawdust is so much looser, more breathable, and so you can put more material on top, but as long as it's porous and the air can get through so the plant roots can breathe.
Drainage is really, really important in blueberries. In a wet climate, we are going to see situations where there's a bit of water in fields. This particular field is actually a very well-drained field. We've got some water here that's just surface ponding in the tractor tracks because we had about 3 or 4 inches of rain in the last couple of days. But in other situations, heavier soils, lower land, it is necessary to do some drainage improvement before planting. Unfortunately, this particular grower did take the time, so I think this field looks like it's off to a good start.